What if the two most powerful nations in history had simply decided on one specific night in 1945 that the world was too dangerous to divide? That question sounds abstract until you realize how close it actually came to going the other way. The Cold War was not inevitable. It was a choice made by exhausted men in damaged cities, under pressures that could each have broken differently on any given day. And the world you live in right now, every alliance, every technology, every border, every fear was built inside the answer they chose. World War II ended in 1945 with two nations standing above the rubble of everything else. The United States had the atomic bomb, the world's largest economy, and an army that had fought across two oceans simultaneously. The Soviet Union had lost 27 million people and emerged from the most devastating land invasion in human history as the most battle-hardened military force the world had ever seen. These two nations had been allies for 4 years. They had fought the same enemy. The alliance was imperfect and deeply suspicious, but it had held through the worst war in human history. What happened next was genuinely open. In July 1945, Harry Truman and Joseph Stalin met at Potsdam, outside Berlin, surrounded by the ruins of the Nazi state they had just destroyed together. Historians who have studied that conference consistently note something. Popular history tends to obscure the two sides were closer to a durable agreement than 50 years of Cold War makes it appear. There were specific moments, specific proposals, points where a different decision by a single person might have produced a completely different architecture for the post-war world. What if one of those moments had gone the other way? The first consequence is the one almost nobody anticipates, and it is not political. It is technological. And it reaches into your daily life in ways that are almost impossible to overstate. Without the Cold War, the nuclear arms race never happens. By 1986, the United States and the Soviet Union had a combined nuclear arsenal of over 60,000 warheads. 60,000 weapons, each capable of destroying a city, pointed at each other across a planet with no real defense against any of them. The engineers who designed those weapons were among the most brilliant people of the 20th century. A generation of extraordinary minds directed entirely toward building better ways to end civilization. Without the Cold War, those minds go somewhere else. The money goes somewhere else too. The United States spent approximately $8 trillion on the Cold War. The Soviet Union spent a comparable proportion of a much smaller economy, and that imbalance is precisely what eventually broke it. In a world where those resources redirect toward medicine, infrastructure, and basic scientific research, the trajectory of human development in the second half of the 20th century looks fundamentally different. But here is where the story gets genuinely complicated. Because the Cold War did not only consume resources, it also generated them. The space race was not a scientific program. Most people understand it as humanity reaching for the stars as the noble expression of our species' curiosity. That is the story NASA wanted to tell. It is not what actually happened. The space race was a war, fought with rockets instead of bullets, measured in orbital altitude instead of territorial kilometers, but a war nonetheless with all the fear, urgency, and unlimited military funding that wars produce. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik into orbit. The official announcement described it as a scientific achievement. What it actually demonstrated to every military strategist in Washington was something far more specific. That the Soviet Union had a rocket powerful enough to carry a nuclear warhead to any point on Earth. The beep Sputnik transmitted as it passed overhead was not a scientific signal. It was a military message, and Washington received it as one. NASA was created in 1958 not because American scientists had suddenly become curious about the moon. It was created because the United States government had concluded that losing control of near-Earth orbit to a hostile nuclear power was an existential threat requiring an immediate and overwhelming response. Without the Cold War, none of that urgency exists. No Sputnik as a military demonstration. No panic in Washington. No NASA built on fear and unlimited defense funding. Does humanity still reach space? Almost certainly, but decades later, driven by curiosity instead of terror. And curiosity moves slower. The moon landing in 1969 was the product of 400,000 engineers working under existential pressure with unlimited government funding. That combination does not exist without an enemy to beat. In a world without the Cold War, humanity probably reaches the moon, but in the 1980s or 1990s, 20 years later at minimum. And that 20-year delay changes everything that follows. GPS was developed by the United States military specifically to guide nuclear weapons and track Soviet submarines. Without Cold War military investment, it either does not exist or arrives decades later. Satellite communications, the technology allowing you to watch this video, make international calls, and receive weather forecasts grew directly from Cold War military satellite programs. The infrastructure making the modern connected world possible was built because two superpowers needed to watch each other from space. And then there is the Internet itself. ARPANET, the direct predecessor of the Internet, was designed in the late 1960s by the United States Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Its specific design goal was to create a communications network that could survive a Soviet nuclear strike by routing data around destroyed nodes. The decentralized architecture of the Internet, the feature that makes it resilient, difficult to control, and fundamentally different from every previous communications network, exists because military engineers needed it to survive nuclear war. Without the Cold War, the Internet either does not exist or emerges from completely different requirements, probably decades later, probably with a fundamentally different architecture. The smartphone in your pocket. The search engine you used this morning. The platform where you found this video. The GPS that guided you to your last appointment. All of it traces back to military research funded by Cold War fear of nuclear annihilation. This is the detail that should genuinely stop you. The technology defining modern life, connecting every human being on Earth, changing daily human experience more than any invention, since the printing press was a byproduct of two superpowers trying to build better ways to destroy each other. Now here is what breaks every assumption you brought into this video. Without the Cold War, there is no Korean War. 3 million people killed. A division between North and South Korea that persists today with nuclear weapons pointed in both directions, a direct product of Cold War competition. A proxy conflict where two superpowers used Korean lives to fight each other without direct confrontation. Without the Cold War, there is no Vietnam War. 3 million Vietnamese dead. 58 mil Americans. An entire region destroyed with chemical weapons whose effects are still visible in birth defect rates today. A war the United States entered specifically because Cold War logic demanded that no country anywhere be allowed to fall to communism, regardless of the local conditions that produced the movement. Without the Cold War, there is no CIA-backed coup in Iran in 1953, which installed a Shah whose repressive rule directly produced the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which directly produced the regional instability defining the Middle East today. No arming of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s. No chain of events producing the Taliban. No chain of events producing what comes after. The Middle East you read about in the news every morning is not an ancient conflict beyond human intervention. It is substantially a product of Cold War proxy competition, the United States and Soviet Union each backing whoever would oppose the other, with the populations of the regions serving as the battlefield for a competition they had no stake in. Without the Cold War, the decolonization of Africa and Asia unfolds in a completely different environment. Every independence movement in the post-war period was immediately pulled into Cold War alignment with newly independent nations serving as battlegrounds for a competition they did not choose. Conservatively, across all these conflicts combined, the Cold War produced between 50 and 100 million deaths through direct warfare, famine produced by war, and political violence by governments installed or maintained by superpower backing. 50 million people who lived in a world without the Cold War, who had children, whose grandchildren are alive today in places that look nothing like the war-damaged societies their grandparents actually inhabited. Now we arrive at the reversal that makes this question genuinely uncomfortable. The Cold War, for all its horror, created something no previous era in human history had ever managed to sustain a stable global order. Between 1945 and 1991, no war was fought directly between major powers. Not one. In 5,000 years of recorded civilization, major powers had always eventually fought each other directly. Empires expanded until they collided. Eventually, always, the great powers went to war with each other directly. The Cold War broke that pattern, not through goodwill or the wisdom of statesmen, but through terror. Through the specific terror of nuclear weapons so destructive that using them meant the end of the civilization that used them. Historians call it the Long Peace. It was not born of cooperation or trust. It was born of mutual assured destruction, the understanding that any direct conflict between the superpowers would end in the annihilation of both. Without the Cold War, without nuclear deterrence as the organizing principle of great power relations, what prevents the next major power conflict? What stops regional powers from filling the vacuum left by the absence of superpower competition? What ends the wars that start when nobody powerful enough to stop them is watching? A world without Cold War terror might be a world with more conventional wars. Smaller than a nuclear exchange, certainly, but more frequent, more numerous. More difficult to end, more wars, each one killing real people, each one reshaping borders and populations in ways that compound across decades. The Cold War was the most expensive, most dangerous, most wasteful peace in human history. But it was, in the most literal possible sense, a peace between the powers that mattered most. And here is the final irony that nobody in 1945 could have predicted. The atomic bomb, the most destructive weapon ever built, the weapon that could end human civilization in an afternoon, may be the primary reason the second half of the 20th century did not end in a third world war. The weapon that could destroy everything may have been the thing that preserved enough for everything to continue. So what do we actually conclude? A world without the Cold War saves 50 million lives lost to proxy conflicts. It redirects $8 trillion away from weapons and toward human development. It gives dozens of nations the right to write their own political history. But it also removes the terror that kept major powers from fighting each other directly for 50 years. It removes the military investment that produced GPS, the internet, satellite communications, and the entire technological infrastructure of the modern world. It removes the competitive pressure that put human beings on the moon in 1969. Not a better world, not a worse one. A different world with its own costs, distributed differently, falling on different people. That is always the answer when you push hard enough on any historical what-if. What we know with certainty is this: the Cold War shaped every institution, every alliance, every technology, and every conflict you have inherited. You are not living in the aftermath of the Cold War. You are living inside it. It changed shape. It changed vocabulary. But the fundamental competition between the world's largest powers for dominance over the global order never ended. It paused, it reorganized, and in the last decade it has resumed in forms immediately recognizable to anyone who lived through the original. Every nuclear treaty being renegotiated, every satellite passing overhead, every undersea cable being monitored by military submarines, every cyber attack on critical infrastructure. That is the Cold War, running on updated hardware, 40 years after the version we put in textbooks officially concluded. Understanding what the world without the Cold War would have looked like is not an exercise in fantasy. It is the most direct possible way to understand why the world you actually live in has the shape it has. Because the question was never only what if the Cold War never happened. The deeper question, the one this video has been building toward from the first frame, is this: what are you still carrying from a war that ended before most of you were born? The answer is everything. The phone in your hand, the map application telling you where to go, the global network connecting you to this video right now, the military bases in countries whose names you may not find on a map, the nuclear weapons still pointed at cities on every continent, all of it. From a war that most people think of as history. And if this changed the way you understand the world you woke up in this morning, there is one more piece of this story that deserves its own video. Because the Cold War almost did not end quietly. On at least 3 specific nights, the entire architecture of mutual deterrence came within minutes of failing completely. Within minutes of the call that would have ended everything. The next video is about one of those nights, about a man whose name you almost certainly do not know, sitting alone in a bunker, looking at a screen telling him nuclear missiles were incoming, with 4 minutes to decide whether to launch a retaliatory strike that would kill hundreds of millions of people. What he chose, and why nobody knew his name for 30 years. Subscribe, because that story is the one that should genuinely keep you awake. And it is the next thing we are building. And if you know someone who still thinks the Cold War is a chapter in a textbook that closed in 1991, send them this. The chapter is still open. It just moved to a different page.